Hey guys, Brian here with Better Chess Training, and we have today episode 4 of How to Think in Chess for Beginners. And today I decided I'm going to play a tougher bot, slightly tougher, Wally rated 1800 on chess.com, um, and try to again apply all of the logical thinking that hopefully I've been demonstrating over the last few episodes. So let's see how it goes. And here I'm going to play as the black pieces because last time I played as the white pieces. And let's see how it goes. Okay, my opponent plays e4. Today I'm going to respond with e5, which is what I typically play. Of course, it's good to experiment when while you're learning chess. It's good to try out different openings because you get exposed to different types of pawn structures, different types of strategies, and then as you get better, or if you want to play more competitively, then you can start to develop your repertoire, which is narrowing the moves so that you can sort of specialize. Although over your chess career and over your lifetime, it's good to try out different openings. Okay, knight c3, not necessarily developing. It's developing a piece, but not making any direct attacks right now. What this does in some openings is it threatens to play f4 because holding back this knight. I'm going to play knight to f6, which is the preferred way to play against it. Okay, so I say f4 is played here, and here there is a. I am going to play a known opening here. There's a lot of different ways to play against this. Of course, we can take, but then that gives white a little more central control. Instead, I'm going to play this move d5, and from there, I'm sort of countering my opponent's gambit. So a gambit is when you temporarily, or maybe not so temporarily, sacrifice material in order to get some other type of concession. In this case, for example, maybe a better development and control of the center. So what I'm doing is I'm ignoring that and I'm playing d5 so that if he takes here on e5, I can go here. Okay, so now I need to consider what to do because um, I don't want to uh, necessarily allow him to play e takes d or f takes e5 now because now I can't jump here. So whenever we're faced with this attack on our pawns, we can consider a few things. We consider capturing the pawn, we can consider pushing the pawn, or we can consider, say, protecting the pawn or ignoring the threat. Okay, for example, with a move like c6. Okay, so we need to consider those uh, partly for you want to kind of look at each one and make a couple moves in your mind and see what is most favorable to you. For example, if we consider taking, he can take back with the knight or the pawn. If he takes back with the knight, we can now take with the knight. And if he doesn't want to lose material, he will take with the pawn. And now we can actually consider taking the queen on um, on d1, which would trade queens, prevent him from castling. Not necessarily horrible for our opponent, but definitely something to that we need to think about. Um, from there, after the king takes, and again, I'm looking a little further ahead, we need to consider what to do here with these pawns, because these pawns will still be in contact with each other, and we have to consider that. Now, the other thing we have to consider is that if we take here, he might ignore it and just take here on um, on e5. In which case, we need to consider how to counter that. So, in that case, um, we probably need to move our knight because even if we take, he can take our knight and be up a piece. So let's say we move our knight back. Probably need to move it. Well, I guess in that case, we could also move it, say, here to g4, um, because it would be protected by the queen. So that's another consideration. So it's something that makes this a little more complicated. Okay. The other way is to push. Now we're attacking our opponent's knight, and now if he takes, we can actually trade knights, and that would be pretty acceptable. So that would be an okay way to handle this. The problem is, well, not really a problem, but um, white can actually just retreat the knight, and then this would come under fire, and this is still hanging too. So that's another issue. And then the one is to protect, say, with something like c6 or maybe um, bishop to e6. Bishop to e6 wouldn't be so good because after white pushes here with f5, we'd have to retreat the bishop, and then this pawn would be underprotected because we'd have two attackers and only one defender. I'm spending a little bit of time on this move, but I think it's an important thing to consider. If we go with something like c6, then we still have this problem here of f takes e5. Now, one thing we can consider here is maybe we, instead of all that, we want to take. We want to take on f4. This does allow our opponent to develop, but it solves some of the other problems, and then maybe now we can take here. Okay. The problem again. So we always what I'm doing and what I want you to try to do is you got to be careful balancing this. Is that you want to always try to look for what your opponent is trying to do and what his threats are, because really chess, especially at the beginning levels, is about not making, understanding what your opponent can do and what you can do, and then making a decision whether you should push forward with your ideas or try to prevent your opponent's ideas, or even better, try to do both at the same time. Of course, this is a skill that is learned over time, but it's something that you always want to start thinking about as you're beginning in chess. Okay. So taking here, I'm not as thrilled with either because of moves like e5 can be kind of dangerous. So actually, I'm coming back to looking at this. If we take here on e4, and again, this is probably the most complicated situation, then here we can actually move, say, the knight to g4, threatening this pawn, and then our opponent might try to do something like this, which is to play d4 to reinforce this pawn. So from there, we want to consider the various options that we have, and as I'm looking at it, from there we can continue on and maybe try to attack the center with something like c5. The problem is, or the danger we need to consider, is that he can play something like h3, but again, here we have this counter of taking on d4. So I actually think taking on e4 is probably the best. The idea being that if I take and then white takes, then I have this knight to g4. If I take and then he takes back with the pawn, then I can consider taking on d1, but I definitely don't have to. I could consider developing another piece. So I think overall it's safe and probably the best move in my opinion. So let's try it. Now, one thing I was considering maybe in a future episode is to look back on some of these games. And here's the variation that we were talking about. Looking back at some of these games and actually seeing if, where I could have improved my play. So here, I'm going to go into my... so I've already done the calculation, and I'm going to go ahead and play knight to g4 here. And here he takes, okay. So now he's up a pawn, but now I get to take here. Okay, so d4 is played. And again, maybe I should have been a little more careful about how I played this. But material is even, so we're doing okay here. Now, I'm actually seeing a couple ideas, and I'm going to share them with you. Because the f pawn has moved, we now have thoughts of this check, queen to h4 check. This comes up in a lot of openings, and here we have a couple options. If white, it would be a mistake for white to block with the pawn, because then I could just take the knight. So most likely, and if he doesn't do any, if he moves the king, I'm going to take the knight. So most likely he'd have to move back with the knight, and then that knight would be pinned. Not saying that that's necessarily the best move to do, but it would be a little annoying, and then maybe give me a chance to do something else. I would still have to take care of my knight, but maybe this knight would be a little, let's say, not so well placed. Now, the other idea is just to move my knight somewhere. I can move it here. I can move it back here. Let's see, I can move it here. Here would not be a good idea because of this bishop. And then back here to c6. The problem with moving it to c6 is then he can maybe go with d5, or also this knight might want a square to go to. And then going back here to d7, the only reason I would do this is if the idea was to go back to f6, but you can see how that really slows down my development. So I'm actually thinking of this queen check as maybe an interesting idea. Well, maybe not such a great idea. If I go there, the knight goes back, and then I move my knight, then he can actually get some extra speedy development with this knight to f3 attacking my queen. So these are ideas. You want to look at them, but you always want to consider, again, what your opponent can do. I know that's kind of my theme for today. So I'm back to moving my knight. The other option is to try to counterattack, maybe by attacking my opponent's knight here. But again, I would still be left with the problem of where to move my knight. So I think I'm going to move my knight here to g6, and that will allow me to prepare my next move, which is to try to develop and get my king to safety. So remember, we're still in the opening phases here. Okay, knight to f3 is played. So my opponent is developing, and so I need to do the same. So a couple thoughts I had here. One is maybe to attack this bishop, develop this bishop here, and with the idea that maybe I can, if this knight moves, then I can develop this bishop to d6, which I think would be a little better than developing it to e7. So that's one idea. The other idea is to just develop my bishop to e7. I don't want to develop it to d6 because this is probably a slightly favorable trade for white, because this bishop can be fairly powerful later on. The advantage of bishop to e7 is that now then I can start thinking about castling. So actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm a little behind in development. He had two pieces out, and so I want to castle and get my king to safety. So here, I just want to make sure there's no other moves that would be better than castling. I don't really see any, so I'm going to go ahead and castle. Okay, my opponent castles as well. Something I need to be aware of is that now white does have some pressure here because of this half-open f-file. If we remember from our episode 1, we talked about half-open and open files, and this is one of the results of it. Okay, now we have a half-open d-file, so we eventually want to put some pressure here. Okay, well, let's try to continue. One way I can actually contest this, I don't know if I want to do it this way, but I can play something like this, bishop to e6. If he captures, and I capture back with a pawn, that would solve one problem, but then this pawn might become weak. So I'm going to wait there. I think what I want to do now is actually develop this knight, and not to c6 because he's probably going to push here, but to d7 and try to get it over here, where I have another piece on the f-file blocking here, but also this knight can help contest the center. So I think that's what I'm going to do there. Notice that this knight, even though this knight is performing a couple duties here. It's covering these squares. So he might want to develop a bishop here, but he won't be able to because of my knight. And then also this square is denied for his knight to go here because I'll just take it. Okay, so I'm going to develop my knight. Okay, now he's putting more pressure here. And so he's got 3 attackers. I've only got 2 defenders, but I can block one of his attackers here with knight to f6. Now, I can also capture here with the bishop, but this is not such a good idea because then he could attack with his bishop. Remember, this pawn is pinned, so now my queen would be attacked, and I'd have to move my queen. So knight to f6 looks pretty good. The knight on f6 is also covering this. Well, some danger I need to watch out for. For example, knight here, and then if he takes with the knight, for example, and I take back with the bishop, he can bring his queen over here, threatening checkmate. But it's okay in this case because actually I think I could just capture this knight. I wouldn't want to play h6 because remember, this pawn is pinned and it'd be able to capture my knight. So these are some things you just need to be aware of. Okay, knight to f6, and then we just have to consider, what if he takes with the rook? I take with the bishop, and then he takes with the knight. I think we're still okay. So here, I'm going to play my knight to f6. Okay, now he develops his bishop here, and I actually think here I'm going to take on e4 and force his knight back. That way, well, I want to consider. Actually, there's a couple moves I can consider here. I can consider this move, h6, which if he forces his knight away, then this knight would be free. So he'd probably take on f6, and then I can take back with the bishop, and now my position starts to get a little freer. One concept that we're going to talk about right now that I'm going to mention to you is one of space. As you can see here, white has this pawn here, and you notice that white's pieces have a little more space than mine. Okay, and one way to alleviate that is through exchanges. So making a move like h6 would help to free things up. The one thing I would need to be careful of is, of course, that this knight would be hanging for now because this pawn is pinned. Okay, so let's see, what else can we do here? Now, I don't need to make any exchanges. I can make another developing move. Maybe I could play something like c6, which would help to prevent anything from coming on to d5. What other things can I do? I can actually attack his bishop here with something like knight to g4 because it is protected by the bishop, so the queen can't take it, and force this bishop away. Although, honestly, this bishop really isn't doing anything too exciting at the moment, so it's really not that big of a deal. So going back to my initial thoughts, which were capturing on e4, and if he brings his knight back here, does that give me any type of advantage? I'm not sure that it does necessarily. So I think I might want to make sure, I might want to take some time and try to develop other pieces. Now, my one minor piece that's not developed is this bishop. Again, now here would not be a good spot to go. I could attack here, but there is a mistake here. In fact, why don't you just take a moment and see what would be the problem of playing bishop to g4 here. Just take a moment. You can pause the video if you want, but I'll give you a couple seconds. Well, the problem with bishop to g4 is that he could play knight takes f6 check. Of course, I need to deal with the check first. I'll probably take with the bishop, and now my bishop would be free to take. So that would not be such a good idea. Now, my other thought is to develop my bishop here to b7. That way it would control this diagonal, including some of these crucial squares, and it would be um, it would be pretty helpful because none of these other squares are accessible at the moment. Now, the one thing I'd have to be careful of is this check, and I take, and then he plays his bishop here. Actually, I don't have to worry about that because my queen is covering it. So actually, it's okay. So b6 actually looks good. So I think I'm going to hold off on exchanging because right now these knights are kind of, he is threatening something like this. But let's say I play b6. So here's the calculation. And then he takes. I take back with the bishop. And then he plays his queen here. Well, I can take on g4. And then if he takes back with the bishop, for example, I can take on d4 with check. If he takes back with the queen, well, now there's no threat of, there's no real threats. So I can go ahead and take a move and play something like bishop to, bishop to b7. So I'm going to go ahead and play b6. Okay, queen to f3, putting a lot of pressure here down this file. Okay. Now, here there is a little trap here that I need to be careful of. If I play my bishop here, he can take with check, and then he would take my bishop. So I need to, before I play something like that, I'd have to consider playing something like rook to b8. Now, we have to look because he's bringing all of his pieces over to the king side and starting to attack my king. So I have to make sure that I can survive that. So if I play rook to b8, let's look at a couple moves. He can take here with check. I take with the bishop. And then I think I'm okay because any type of, if he tries to bring his queen over to checkmate me, I can always take this knight, and now there's no more checkmate threat. So I think that's actually okay. But yeah, again, it would be a mistake to play bishop to b7 first. Let's see. If I play rook to b8, what else can he do? He can, let's see. By the way, there's always these attacks here on f7, but we're actually okay because the rook and the pawn are about equal to the knight and the bishop. But because these are so active, it's actually probably better for me. So he doesn't want to take on f7 right away. Okay, let me just see if there's any other moves that I want to make before I try rook to b8. Actually, you know what? I think I have to play rook to b8 now or something because right now this is not protected. Let's say I just make another move like c5. Then again, knight takes f6 check, and then the queen would win the rook. So I think I have to play rook to b8. So I'm actually on the defensive a little bit. Okay, now the rook comes here to e1. This could be a little bit dangerous. But I think I have time here to actually play rook bishop to b7. The only thing I'm thinking if somehow he tries to clear this file, but this bishop can't really move out of the way in a forceful manner that allows him to take advantage. So I'm going to go ahead, play bishop to b7. Now I'm attacking this twice. Now he goes for the capture here. So I have to consider all of my possibilities. There's going to be a lot of pressure coming in, but I do think I need to go ahead and take this. If I take, he takes with the bishop, I take with the king, that would pin this knight. He might do something just like this knight check. And then after I back up, actually he would be he could fork my, oh no, he can't, well, I'd have this attack. He'd have to move his queen first. That would give me time to do something. Can he add another attacker? Well, so it is actually a little bit dangerous, although not really, because this knight is sort of pinned at the moment. But I think I do have to take. Okay, he takes again, and I'm going to take. So here's where hopefully I didn't make a mistake in any of these calculations. Okay, now he's blocking my bishop. Can I just take it? Can I just take this pawn? I think I can. Well, the idea now is that if I take here, he can pin my bishop to my queen, and then threaten to play c4, which would win a piece. So actually, I think I can leave that there for the moment, and maybe just take a move and move my king back to get out of this pin. Let's see here. Um, Actually, you know what I can do is I can just take with the queen. Then, if you try, their discoveries don't work because my queen is protected, and then if he tries to attack I'm threatening to take here on d4. So, okay, I'm going to take here on d5 with the queen, which would be better than with the bishop. Okay, now he's moving. So, couple things here. Moving the bishop out of the way so that the rook can protect. So we have to be careful there. I'm going to move my king out of the way, and we just have to make sure of any any trouble here. Actually, no, I actually have a good. No, I need to. I need to. I need to move my king out. One thought I had was knight to d4 check to get my queen out of the way, and if the king were to move, to take with the bishop. That's possible, but he actually can take with the rook because and attack my queen because remember my knight is pinned here. So I think it's critical to move my knight, my king out of the way. By the way, I am up. Am I up a pawn? It's hard to tell because of the exchange. I think I'm technically up a pawn. There's the same number of pawns here, but he gave up a pawn for the exchange. By the way, the exchange, when I say the exchange, that's a rook for a knight or a bishop. But in this case, I actually got two pieces, the knight and the bishop, for the rook and the pawn. Okay, I know a lot of technical stuff I'm giving you here. But I think the best move here, if I move the king out of the way, what can he do? Well, he can take here with check, and then I would just take back with the bishop. Um, and I think I'd be okay there. He could take my queen, but it's protected. Um, Now, I could do something fancy here, and, well, it might not work. I could do this check, and then, but then he could block with the queen. But if he blocked with the bishop, then I could just take the knight. Um, I think I'm just going to move my king out of the way. It seems like it's a quiet move, but it serves a very important purpose, which is to both protect my king, but also to free this knight. And then I'm threatening a capture there. Okay, so let's do that. Moving our king out of the way. Okay, now here he's attacking my pawn. I can just take this pawn actually, but we want to check to see if there's any real big threats that would be useful here. Let's see here. I don't want to take because he'll take back with the rook and then I lose material. I can actually just take this pawn. I just want to make sure that it's not going to get trapped. I mean, he could play this rook over here, but then I could always play this check. If you, of course, and then if he tries to block with the bishop, I can take this knight. Now, there's a lot of calculating to do. I think in this part, this is something as you get better, you always want to be careful when, especially when he's a stronger opponent, when he offers a pawn. You want to make sure that you're not getting trapped somewhere, and that's what I'm double checking right now. Okay, if I take the pawn, which would give me more material, the only real threats, I mean, he could do this check, but then I just take back with the bishop. I believe I'm safe there. I really don't see anything that's super dangerous about it. So I'm going to go ahead and take it. Now, I could be wrong. Okay, now he's offering this queen trade, which, let's see here. I'm just saying, if I take here and he takes back with the knight, does that help me at all? I had a little bit of material, but now the other, I could do something a little tricky, which is hit him with this check first, but I don't think that does anything necessarily. And that way, if he takes with the knight, now I can take here. But then he just takes back with the bishop, and it's not a big deal. Um, Now I can take the pawn, but again, it's really I'm not really winning a pawn because he can take one of these pawns. I'm slightly ahead in terms of actual material. Um, so I think it might make sense just to capture the queen here. Again, with this principle that we can, um, the principle being that because we're ahead in material, we can trade, and that just brings us closer to victory. So I'm going to go ahead and take it. Okay, he had to take back with the knight, otherwise I was going to take it. And now we have to come up with our plan now, okay? I do think we have an advantage. So we have uh, essentially two extra pawns. One pawn because we have one extra pawn here, but also with the trades we made, we have two extra minor pieces for a rook. So that gives us the other pawn advantage. Um, Here, we want to improve our pieces basically. So what I think I'm going to do is first want to see if there's any tactics that we can employ, but um, I think I just want to what I'm going to do here is hit him with this check. And the idea here is to worsen the position of his king. His king is further away from the center now that we're approaching the end game. And then the other idea is that if he were to block and trade, then that would be advantageous for me. So now the move I'm considering here is knight to g4 with this threat of this check here, because then I have, if he actually moves his king, there's some threats there. And if he doesn't move his king, I can make my own threats with the knight. If he takes with the rook, then I would win material. And if he moves his pawn to give his king another square to move to, then I can position my knight better as well. Just want to make sure. So one thing I want to make sure, you can't bring any of his rooks to the 7th rank. We saw that in our last excuse me, we saw that in our last episode. And also want to make sure that I'm not giving up any type of checkmate. So you always want to look to see, are there any checks? All of these checks here are covered by my pieces. So I think I'm in pretty good shape. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play. Actually, before I do that, let me see, are there any better ways to do it? I don't think so. I'm going to go ahead and play this knight here. Okay, now he brings this knight over, trying to protect here. And now my opponent is going to lose material. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take his knight, and then he's going to take the knight back with the rook, and then I'm going to hit him with this check. This check is going to fork the rook and the king, so he has to give up even more material in order to prevent that. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, I'm going to check him. And he loses the exchange. So now I'm just up a piece and a pawn. Okay, so here we again need to consider what to do. And I think what I'm going to do is, let's see. Well, I was thinking of just bringing my bishop back, but I'm just trying to see if I can do something more active because I don't have to move that bishop. Here I can actually activate my king and bring it forward. And then bring my rook over to trade it. Try to trade it with this rook. So I think that's a pretty good move. And there's no real checks he can give me because of this knight covering here. he could attack my bishop, but then my bishop could just retreat. Okay, I'm going to bring my king in. So in the end game, when there's less danger of being checkmated, okay, so here he is bringing in his piece here. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back. Okay, now he's threatening to check me here. So what I can do, well, a couple things I can do here. I could actually block him by bringing my bishop back this way, which I think would be fine. Yeah, I think allowing this check wouldn't be such a great idea. Question is, there's a couple ways to do that. I could block, or I could move my king to cover those squares, but then he can check me here. The other way is to bring my rook over, so then if he checks me, I can block here, but then he can win a pawn. So we don't want to allow that. So I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and block off this file. And so now, of course, he can get me with this check, but I can bring... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my king over here instead, and then bring my rook here to contest, and then to contest the file. So you don't want to see how this rook can hit me with these checks. Okay, so now, oh, my opponent made a mistake here. He brought his king over, and again, this is an opportunity for you to try to figure out what I'm going to play next. So take a couple moments, and I'll give you a couple seconds here. You can pause the video if you need more time. Okay, here, his king is lined up with his rook, and so I can play this move here. This is a pin, pinning his rook. And now, mind you, he can't, he's still pinned. So even though he moved his pawn, so I'm going to go ahead and attack it again and try to win some material. Okay, you can see now he's giving up all of his material, but it's not going to matter. And this will be pretty easy. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this with check. And this game is pretty much over. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to, let's see here. Well, I'm just going to use my king and go ahead and grab these pawns. And this is something where your opponent would probably resign at this point, but since it is the computer, we're going to go ahead and beat it. I'm going to show you how to beat it. Okay, he's giving up another pawn. And again, we're in the zone. I did make a mistake in my last video where I said that if I did something, my opponent would be stalemated. And so we wanted to avoid that. In this case, or it wasn't the case in the video because he could have moved one of his pawns. But again, we always want to check when we have a big advantage that we're not going to stalemate our opponent. So here, I'm going to go ahead and take this. Always make sure that your opponent can make a move. And I'm going to go ahead and give him this check. It's not a big deal. And actually, just to make things a little simpler, I'm going to get rid of this pawn. And this is giving back material when you're totally winning, just to make sure that, that you're going to win. Okay. Now, the easiest way, let me see if I can do this, is to create another, I'm going to create a queen. And then I'm going to checkmate him using my rook and my queen. Okay. And again, just got to make sure that your opponent has a place to go, that you're not going to stalemate him. Okay. So here, this is a, they call it a, I forget what they call it here, but like a, sometimes we call this the rolling. Oh! And here, just as I was telling you to be careful not to stalemate, I stalemated my opponent. So, oh boy, what a mistake I made here. Let me, let's, I guess that's a good surprise ending for you. It shows you always have to be vigilant. My opponent tricked me. I was about to show you a checkmate, and instead we got a draw. Okay, here we are on the analysis board. I wanted to show you the mistake I made here at the end. So here, my opponent sneakily goes to g3. The knight is covering these squares, and then when I move my rook here, it is stalemate. So how could have I avoided that? Well, I could have given him a check, like this, okay? And then from here, my opponent has the choices of going here or here. Let's look at them both. If he goes here, it's pretty easy because of this checkmate. And then if he goes here, it just takes a couple more moves. Queen to h2 check, and then here, and then we have our choice of queen to h4 checkmate, or much more attractive h5 checkmate. So I wish I would have seen that. I wish I would have done that. You can see, even though the game was totally winning, in just one moment you can lose or draw a game that you should have won. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. It quite a twist ending there. I hope you guys watched it to the end. But it is a good lesson for me, and hopefully for you, that we always need to be vigilant when we're playing chess. Anyways, check out the last episode from the series here. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.